Welcome to the brainsTEM podcast. This is your host, Dr. Hillary Marusak, produced by Amanpreet Vogel, Manmeet Vogel, and Gabby Maramag. All right, welcome to our anxiety, fear, and afraid episode is what we're calling it. I am very delighted to have my special guest today, Dr. Arash Javanbakht, who is one of my colleagues and also an expert in fear and anxiety and stress and trauma. He's a psychiatrist and a neuroscientist here at Wayne State University, but I will let you, Arash, introduce yourself.
Thanks so much for having me. Well, I'm a psychiatrist. I'm specialized in anxiety and trauma. Most of my work in the clinic is with people who have seen the worst of what humans experience, whether it's survivors of torture, human trafficking, refugees, first responders, civilians with trauma experience. And of course, I do some research, mostly focus on what trauma does to human brain and body and how we can mitigate those impacts. Ranging from looking at the longitudinal impact of trauma exposure in refugee children and their parents, and in the body, in the brain, looking at inflammation, looking at the genetic changes. We use some very cool augmented reality technology, basically Iron Man goggles, you wear them on and other humans come in and interact with you, using it mostly in a project we are working with first responders.
Yeah, lots to cover today. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. We need to have you on for all of those different topics, I know. So this is timely. This is coming out on Halloween. So the topic of fear and anxiety is very relevant, but also relevant for some of the recent kind of issues that are going on in society. So maybe we'll touch on some of that work that you're involved in. But you've recently had a book come out called Afraid. So I want to start with that, just asking you what prompted you to write the book. What was that process like for you?
Thank you so much. So I'm very excited about this book. One thing that I didn't mention that I do a lot is public education and public scholarly work. So basically bringing knowledge from science to the public sphere. One of the challenges we have is that there's a lot of pseudoscience and misinformation out there about a lot of these areas that we work on. I've been looking at the books that are out there in this field. They're books that somebody had a condition and then they decided to write a book about that condition, how people can treat themselves. Sure. Not a lot of professionals are involved in the field. Mm-hmm. And also, through this work, I've found that it can be very impactful, right? Mm-hmm. You and I do tons of research and write papers that are read by a limited number of scientists in our mm-hmm. field, but the public is not informed by it. So we can reach to tens of thousands, up to millions of people, letting them know what's happening in this world. And of course, as a psychiatrist in the clinic, on a day-to-day basis, I educate my patients about mm-hmm. what is the purpose of fear, anxiety, how they work in us, how we can reduce them, how we can manage them, how we can use them, what are the lifestyle changes that can help us. And at some point, I decided that, well, I can share all this knowledge, what I had written before in small, let's say, public scholarly pieces on the media, or I'd done interviews or talked to the patients about, write them in a book. So I pitched the book to publishers and then I started writing. The mistake I made was I didn't take a sabbatical. So this book was written over the course of the year at nights and over the weekends. And I learned a lot through the process because one thing is you want to make science and research relevant to mm-hmm. the public. And the book was finished actually in, I was getting close to my deadline. Mm-hmm. And
like most writers, I feel like.
Yeah, and I had to wrap it up. And I thought like most other books, you tell the publisher that I need 6 more months and mm-hmm. then they do it. And they said, no, we want this to come out in the fall. Yeah. So I had a few weeks and I decided to travel to Tucson, Arizona, sit next to the mountains in this old resort where John Wayne used to go when he was filming. And sat there and I basically rewrote half of the book over the course of 2 weeks and cut out about a third of the book, which mm-hmm. I found not very directly useful to people,
Sure.
right? Because I don't want to waste people's time.
Yeah.
I want it to be relevant.
No, that's fantastic. I'm so excited to get this out and see what people think about it. So we'll share more information about the book in the bio of the podcast. But I think this is something we talk about a lot as, the BrainSTEM podcast. Our goal is really to, like you said, educate the public about science, because most science, at least in the States, is funded by the U.S. government, so taxpayer dollars. So really, the general public should be the ones who are understanding and being the beneficiaries of scientific advancements. So that's why I love the work that you're doing, whether you're on radio shows or news, or you're writing a book, or even just sharing that with kind of psychoeducation with your patients. So thank you so much for the work that you do. You mentioned the definition of fear is where you usually start with patients. So can you tell us how you think of fear? What is the definition?
So, and that's a very good question, because we have a lot of diverse approaches and understandings of what's fear, what's anxiety, what's trauma, right? So there's the sphere of public and in the science. And also historically in our scientific work and clinical work, we have seen fear and anxiety as annoying, redundant things that should be eradicated. Like the appendix that gets infected and we have to remove it, and it has no purpose. And to understand fear and anxiety, you know better than me as a neuroscientist, we look at rats' brains to understand about the human brain, how fear works in human brain, which means it is a very primitive system. So I could argue probably that fear is as old as biology. And it is there, it has been instilled deeply in all of us, in all biological, physical, and psychological aspects of our existence, with one purpose: to protect us against annihilation or serious damage or loss. So I see fear as a system and mechanism and reaction and response, mostly reaction. It's not proactive, which is there to protect us, detect danger, and then protect us against the danger. And that danger is should be seen in the context of where we evolved, right? Let's say I was coming on this podcast and I was nervous and I was anxious because, I don't know, let's say I have fear of public speaking or talking to people. My heart would be pounding in my chest and my breathing would be difficult. Why is that? Why is a system that is instilled in us to protect us, why is my closest friend now being my enemy? The answer is that it's not my enemy. The thing is, in the context it evolved, the dangers were very different, or the perceived threats were very different than what they are now. Back there and then, what were the dangers? If I was among my tribe mates and I was talking to them, they didn't like me, chances were high in a matter of minutes, one of us would be injured or killed or had to run away. So the fight and flight system comes in to pump the blood everywhere it has to go and focus my attention on danger so I can protect myself. So it's a system which is confused in the modern life, because majority of the perceived threats, and I keep saying perceived because there's an objective threat and then there's a perceived threat. Majority of perceived threats in our modern life are abstract, a lot more abstract. Let's say a predator attacking you. I mean, if a grizzly bear is in this room, you and I would have the same reaction to it. But what's the threat of an infection that is coming from, let's say, China and then spreading to Europe and then spreading to the east of the country? These are things that the fear system gets confused about.
Right, because it hasn't experienced that before in its evolutionary past. I think that's really interesting. You've written a ton about that kind of mismatch between like modern day fear systems and how we kind of evolved as humans. And I think it's so interesting to know that you're kind of pointing out the positive potential side of fear as well, that it has some utility. Can you speak more about kind of the positive side of fear that we don't often recognize?
Absolutely. So per definition, its job is to protect us in situations that can be seriously dangerous. Let's say a big object rapidly starts approaching me. I do not have time to sit there and think about the philosophical reasons the driver is driving so fast and coming towards me. The animal inside of me just grabs me and pulls me out of the way.
Right.
So the fear circuitry is there. It's basically a warning system. This warning system and that caveman, cavewoman that is inside of us, which is the fear system, a lot of times sees it well or even better than us, especially when it comes to situations which are relevant to what it trained for, right? Or what it evolved for.
It's like, I've seen this before. Here's what I should be doing to react.
Absolutely. And the parallel I make is a lot of times when you and I are sleeping and dreaming, we are just there while someone else is running the show. When we are awake, that someone else, something else, the caveman, cavewoman, primitive brain, mind, is just watching the show that we are running. So with right now with me, that caveman is here looking at everything that's happening in this room, confused a little bit. So one thing, to go back to your questions, one thing is fear does is it's a warning, right? So it's important to pay attention to it. I always say fear is sometimes the pin in the wrong chair that we are sitting us on. It means that we have to fix a chair or move off of the chair. I've had, let's say, someone who is in an abuse, in clinical work, most of the times we're working on reducing fear and anxiety or eradicating it. I mean, although it's not possible. But let's say someone is in a highly abusive relationship and they have anxiety. That would be dumb for me to want to eradicate that anxiety because that's what is protecting them, right? If you're walking on the street and someone approaches you with a gun or with a knife, these are more tangible situations, concrete situations that fear helps us. But then there are parts of more abstract anxieties that help us move away. Basically, it cultivates the energy, right? Fear is one of those most powerful reactions we have in cultivating our whole mental and physical energy and attention, grabbing your attention, bringing it to what matters. So a lot of times it does help us and save us. Let's say you are somebody's in a not physically abusive, but unhappy relationship that is stealing from their future, stealing from their career, stealing from their offspring in the future. And the anxieties that are related to that difficult situation and condition is a wake-up call that, hey, how about this energy moves you away and moves you out of this relationship or make you fix it? Or let's say a lot of people who go to therapy, what do? They go because of this energy, this pain that pulls them, and now I have to do something and change something. Sometimes somebody is stuck in a terrible job that they don't like, and the anxieties of it can help them move away. And sometimes you can cultivate the anxiety yourself or utilize it, or I mean, you and I talk in science about optimal level of arousal, right? For a person to learn, for an animal also to learn, we need an optimal level of anxiety. If I'm too bored and I came here to this conversation, I wouldn't be prepared. I wouldn't be like, I hadn't reviewed some of the thoughts that we wanted to share with each other, and I wouldn't probably be fully here. But if I'm terrified also, the amygdala will bypass all the logical processing systems, and I will not be able to focus and pay attention to our conversation because my attention is too much focused on what could go wrong. So that optimal level of arousal is something that we can achieve, and we can actually induce and we can trigger, meaning that let's say I have an exam and I'm not studying well enough, and then I remind myself of the possible negative consequences. That helps me motivate me enough to start moving and changing things. Of course, fear can also be used in anxiety, in making us better and stronger. When you're scared of something, if you use that anxiety in a way that you go and learn skills to deal with it, right? Let's say during my medical school, there were times that I had to be on myself in the emergency room. And I'm a trainee during residency. It's terrifying. You just started. And then that motivates you to learn more and more and more, pay more attention, because my next call, I want to be more ready and more skilled to deal with those situations.
So you have to have some level of anxiety. And you talk a lot in your book about harnessing the power of fear and anxiety, and I think that was a really great demonstration of that. And maybe we can return to some of those tips you might have for people later on. But I want to ask, because it's Halloween season, we always think about like Halloween scary movies. People love to go to haunted houses. They like roller coasters. So people like to be afraid. Why is that?
And isn't that fun? That interesting that people come pay me to treat their fear and anxiety.
Right.
Then they go pay at a haunted house to be scared by the people in the haunted house, right? So, and this was actually one of the coolest and most fun parts of the book that I was working on. Haunt My Nerves, Why We Love to Be Scared. That's the name of the chapter. And I have several evidences and theories. One is, you know better than me, there's so much overlap between the brain circuitry of fear and thrill and excitement. Norepinephrine networks, dopamine, all of the, and of course the physical sensations. When you do a thrilling experience, your heart is pounding, you're breathing heavily, your body's on alert, muscles are ready, and that's what happens in the fear. So I think one of the reasons we do that and we enjoy scary, let's say movies or haunted houses or experiences, is that we rile up the animal. We excite the system, but we know we are in charge and in control. Let's say your dog sometimes sees a wolf howling on TV and gets riled up and cannot differentiate that dog or wolf on TV than, let's say, a wolf, a dog which is outside. There's that inside of us. So
Right.
you see it, and part of you believes it. Part of you, let's say someone with something looking like a knife is chasing you in a haunted house versus on the streets. Your reaction is different. So part of you, you and I know, we put a person in the scanner and they're sleepy and bored, and you show them a picture of a scared person or a scary photo, and the amygdala fires up, the fear brain fires up, even though the person doesn't know. So when you do those activities, you excite the animal, you rile up the animal, and then you enjoy the ride.
Yeah.
But there are also a lot of other uses here. For example, it's a very mindful experience. When you're watching a horror movie for a couple of hours, you're not thinking about the problems you have in life. So,
That's a
and
good
you know,
point.
we know mindfulness helps a lot with reducing anxiety. It also gives us a sense of control, especially for people who are anxious. It's paradoxical that some people who are more anxious, they love to see horror movies, for example, because now you're in control. You have the remote next with you, so you can stop and you can start it. And your context processing brain is also there to tell you, yeah, there's a lion here, but the context is a zoo. And then that reduces anxiety. And there should be a balance there. So I think one of the
Interesting.
things these activities can do, if you are thoughtful about them, is they bring fear to its perspective. When you are at an edge, on an edge, that you know if you fall, you're dead, which is real fear.
Right.
Then the anxiety of this paper not getting published or accepted, or that grant not going through, or I don't know, other things, that challenges that terrify us, is put back in its perspective. That thing
Right.
is not going to kill me. And I think
Right.
this is an important function of these more realistic fears and thrills.
Yeah.
That can also be a practice for the fear system, the same way we practice our bodies.
Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it. So next time you're at a haunted house, you are practicing and you're kind of pushing your limits. I think that's really, those are great theories, by the way. I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. But I think the idea of control makes a lot of sense to me, that you're kind of like putting yourself in this test. You know you're going to be stressed, but you know that everything is okay and that it's not real, or that you can basically handle it. You will survive. So I also think about exercise, because exercise is kind of stressing your body. Like all those same things happen. Your heart rate elevates. You know, if you were to look at all of your kind of biometrics, you would probably think you were dying. Like something is terribly wrong, but exercise is kind of a controlled stressor that ends up being really good for you. And a lot of people do feel that sense of calm afterwards. So there is some sort of like reinforcing mean to do that. So I don't know if you thought of exercise in the same way, or as like a different type of stressor. Just curious.
Absolutely. So, first of all, exercise is an exposure therapy to physical symptoms of anxiety, right?
Yeah.
But beyond that, so
Meaning, sorry, like the heart racing, like
Absolutely.
physiologically aroused. Okay.
yeah, so you feel more comfortable with those symptoms,
Sure.
right? Because sometimes anxiety, especially when it comes to panic, is because of what's happening in the body. And the
Right.
brain perceives that we are in a difficult, dangerous situation. Of course, when you regularly work out, your baseline heart rate is lower. So it signals a calm internal environment to your brain on a steady and constant state. But beyond that, biologically, you and I were not designed to sit at a desk and lay on a couch all day long.
Right.
Right? So, and why do we do exercise? Because we want to kind of replicate what this body was designed to do. And that makes it more healthy. So you work out, you put stress in this physical system,
Right.
which replicates what it used to. Like we used to walk a lot back in the time. We had physical things that we had to do during the time that we evolved. Same way, I think these kind of scary activities, thrilling activities, are an exercise for a fear system which is not getting what it needs to get on a regular basis. We talked about this ape being so confused in the anxieties of real normal like civilized life, which don't associate with what it was evolved to do.
Right. We're too cushy.
Yeah, so when we do thrilling activities, when you do expose ourselves to some levels of controlled fear and anxiety, that kind of could be an exercise to the system. That might be the reason after that mule ride for a few days, I didn't feel anxious.
That's a great point. Yeah. I always think of fear as like exciting fear too. Like there is some sort of like thrill to it, which is so counterintuitive. The other thing I was thinking about earlier on when you were talking about the importance of fear is that there have been studies, and I'm sure you're aware of them, where people like lack a functional amygdala. And you brought up the amygdala as like your fear center in the brain. It does much more, but for, this conversation, we can think of it as like that. And people who lack that amygdala, they can actually get into trouble because they can, approach venomous snakes and do things that would actually cause them bodily harm. So it's just a really interesting concept that it is positive and adaptive to have this fear circuitry.
Absolutely. The parallel is the pain system, right? If you're unable to experience pain, you will end up with a lot of wounds and bruises and burns.
That's a great point. You'll keep your hand down on that stove unnecessarily. Yeah. You talk a little bit about fear and courage, and I always think of, I don't know if they're urban myths. I'm sure this has happened a couple times, but moms who have, a kid trapped under the car and they actually like lift a whole BMW. And I think there's some cases of that. So fear can cause courage and strength. What's up with that?
So actually that chapter, Courage is Not Lack of Fear, Absence of Fear, was one of the chapters I had to work a lot harder on because I didn't know much and there wasn't much out there, so I had to do a lot of research. So what we see as a courageous action, so courage is an action, right? You see something, you perceive it, and it's usually something that someone else does. We are looking at it from outside, and it can have so many aspects to it. You mentioned the mom example. There is part which is biology. I mean, we know rats. There's research. Rats, usually, what's their fear response? Their response to danger, freeze or run away, right? Freeze or flight.
I'm envisioning a rat like lifting a little tiny car, like Hot Wheels.
That's very cool. But when rats have pups, the reaction becomes aggression. They fight. Why? Because evolutionarily, if they leave, the pups are going to be eaten.
Oh, okay,
and that is not what you want.
Right.
So we shift. That's one is the biology. When we are parents, we are a lot more serious about our children. I've heard from a lot of my friends who became parents that you change. It feels like your biology, your brain changed. The other part is also the meaning of that experience, right? And I will get to it. But stepping back, what we see as a courageous activity from outside is very complicated because, for example, let's say we see somebody faced someone with a knife, or someone with a knife came to a group of people, and one person jumped in and took the knife away from him. We see this as courageous, right? It could be stupid. Maybe that person underestimated the threat and overestimated their abilities, but they got lucky. Or it could be that person was a Navy SEAL. They had a lot of skills there, and they knew that they're going to handle that. So they had a very good sense of control. There might be a snake here, and I get terrified, but because you have studied snakes, you know that snake is non-venomous. So the knowledge you have leads to an action that you take that from my side looks courageous.
Yeah.
Sometimes courage is, as you mentioned, there's a meaning to it. There's basically some bigger thing than us that we perceive that forces us to do. I've dealt with this a lot with first responders that I work with. I had this police officer, her partner got shot right next to her, and the partner's on the ground bleeding, and she sits there and puts her hand on her partner's neck, stop the bleeding while the gunman is coming towards them shooting.
Wow.
And the question I asked her was, weren't you worried about your own life at that moment?
Right.
The answer was, I was not thinking about it. All I was thinking about was helping my partner. So the meaning these have, right? And it gets very complicated. For example, right now, a Russian soldier in the war, how is courage defined for them versus a Ukrainian soldier who is there to protect their country and their family and their friends and their kids? And then sometimes the courage is basically choosing between two fears. This is like back to that soldier. They go ahead with the gun shooting, and the other ones thinking that the Russian soldiers, thinking that they are at risk, but there's a bigger fear if they don't do that, they will be
Right.
punished
The
back
lesser of
home.
two evils.
A lot of times that fear is not very concrete. It's more abstract. It's imagine. It's let's say the society. What will my society think about me? What will the culture think about me? Well, based on my religion, how's God gonna deal with this with my situation? So a lot of actions that we take, which looks courageous, have so many different aspects. And it was just a few that I mentioned here.
Yeah.
It's hard to know what's courage.
Yeah.
And it's because at the end of the but it what we know for sure is courage is defined in the face of fear, right?
Yeah.
So there is no courageous person who doesn't experience fear. We talked about if you cannot experience fear, you are there's a problem with the brain. So there is fear, and if there's no fear, there's no courage.
Right.
So they're very much linked with
They
each
go
other.
hand in hand. Yeah. And I like how you brought up in psychology, they call it the biopsychosocial model, where, we have our biology and the instincts that you're mentioning, and then the psychological or all of the, interpersonal relationships or your thoughts about things like, oh, this is safe. And then you've got the social aspects that also play a role. And we, like culture, religion, you mentioned, and all of these things kind of interact because humans are very hard to study and complicated beings. But I think that was a really interesting explanation. I want to talk about trauma exposure, which is a huge part of your work, and you've already mentioned a lot of different types of potential traumas. So how does trauma affect this ability to process fear, or what does trauma do in terms of fear?
And trauma is very common. We both work in this realm in an urban environment.
Yeah, maybe we should define trauma too, and how you
Absolutely.
define it.
Absolutely. And I think, thank you for reminding me. It's very important because these days, especially on TikTok and Instagram and everywhere, everybody's using this word so loosely, which is a disservice to those who have real trauma exposure, right? Because there are a lot of stressful situations people are perceiving it as traumatic. Oh, well, I had this difficult conversation with my boss and that was traumatic.
Right.
No, it's not trauma.
Right.
What we define as trauma is something that could be really threatening to someone's physical, sexual integrity. We are talking about situations like war, explosions, shooting, robbery, assault, rape, serious motor vehicle accidents, serious illnesses, natural disasters, things that could be really threatening to my existence. That's trauma. I'm not saying that if I had a difficult breakup, it's not stressful. This is important because sometimes people get defensive that, oh no, you say this was not tough. Yeah, it was tough, but it's not defined as trauma. It's stressful, highly stressful. And trauma could be directly experienced. Somebody shoots at me, or it could be indirect exposure, especially in, let's say, first responders, frontline workers. You go to the aftermath of a shooting and you have to do the cleanup, or you see it happening to others. And it could also be through detailed exposure repeatedly to the stories of it happening, especially for the loved ones. So what trauma does is that it can lead to a lot of different reactions. One part is that, of course, we go on high alert, right? The whole fear system wakes up and puts everything on the back burner, everything else, because the attention is on survival. Right now, if there's a gunman in this parking lot, I'm not seeing any of these beautiful colors around here. My focus is strictly on where is the person.
Right.
But it can touch people at different levels and different ways. And let's say one common reaction we talk about is post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. It's important to mention PTSD is not like an infection you either have or you don't have.
Right.
You and I, to have a common language in research, we use, let's say, from 0 to 100% impact trauma has on someone, we draw a line at 70, and we say above it, we call it PTSD.
Right.
69 or 68 still is impacted. That's why in the clinic, we more focus on the distress and dysfunction these symptoms are causing, rather than does the person meet all the symptoms or not.
Sure.
But overall, when we talk about PTSD, the person's mind and brain is in fight and flight mode. They constantly scream for danger, but the problem, which is good, but the problem is it stays. It doesn't go away. In the immediate vicinity of trauma, it's helpful. But then when it comes to PTSD, it stays for years and years. I've had cops who were in shootings and 8-9 years later, for firefighters who had a tragic, and for most of them, the most tragic part is when a child loses their life.
Yeah.
And for a decade later, they're feeling the fear, they're feeling the anxiety, the nightmares, flashbacks, all these symptoms come back to the person. They're constantly on edge, avoidant. A lot of them don't even want to leave house because it's hard to screen for danger outside. And then there's the cognitive aspect of it. For a lot of people, the meaning of world and life and themselves changes, right? Survivor's guilt. Why did this happen to my partner and not myself? The feelings of being damaged, the feelings that I did something to deserve it. Because, and I think it's important, I will try to be brief about it. A lot of times we are creatures that want to make sense of the world and the universe and the events. It's hard for us to accept something happening at random. So anytime, let's say, the trauma happened to me, let's say I was assaulted or raped, I keep thinking about why it happened to me, right? Depending on the ideology and world philosophy I have, let's say I'm religious or I'm not religious, I may have different theories about why it happened to me. A lot of times, sadly, those theories surround myself. What did I do to deserve this, or this happened to me? And a big part of treatment is talking to people that the bird was there when the cat was hungry looking for food. And that's why it happened. The bird didn't do anything wrong. And then there are other reactions into trauma, which could be, I mean, some people do not react with PTSD per se, but there's high anxiety, there's depression, there's avoidances.
Trauma can have so many different kind of outcomes, like you said. That was really interesting, and I think you painted a really nice picture of just the breadth of experiences. And you also mentioned that PTSD doesn't happen to everybody, and that most people have experienced a trauma at some point, especially in Detroit, which is the context of our work. And a lot of people find possibly some benefit or some aspects that make them more creative that they attribute to trauma. So can you kind of talk about the potential positive side of trauma for creativity or other things?
So, as you said, sadly, exposure is too high. But also, we got to see that we have evolved through much worse environments.
Right.
Like 500 years ago, not too far ago. You and I had a very high chance of being killed or losing a limb in a war or an assault or fighting with the other group or the other nation or the other tribe. So we have, I believe, evolved to be very resilient towards trauma. And that's why when we talk about trauma experiences, as you said, majority of people do not develop what we call PTSD. A lot of people carry on the impact, whether negative or positive, and I'll get to the positive aspect in a couple of minutes. But trauma doesn't touch everybody in the same way. And the other part is the type of trauma also matters. We know that the more interpersonal, the more human inflicted the trauma is, because we are creatures of group orientedness and we want to trust the others. The impact is higher. Let's say survivors of torture, the impact is much, much higher than, let's say, someone who went through a natural disaster or severe motor vehicle accident. The positive aspect of trauma a lot of times is it basically, as I said earlier about fear, puts things in context. Like I've heard from a lot of first responders and veterans that the anxieties or challenges or worries or disagreements of day-to-day life do not impact them as much as they did before, because they have seen how it is to lose your life or almost lose your life, or what are the real threats of life. And then that also brings back to you basically redefining and revising your life. I mean, we all get wiser through difficult, adverse experiences, right? A simple example, you're young and you are thinking about who's an ideal dating partner, and you're thinking about how they should look and how they should have this and that thing. And then 10 years later, your thinking is very different. You're like, oh, these are the things which matter in a relationship, right? Not those things that I was thinking. What is that? Wisdom gained through experiences. A lot of times this happens through difficult challenges and experiences and traumatic experiences. For example, I mean, loss does that the same too. I lost my dad about 5 years ago. And one of the things that happened to me after that loss was remembering that I'm next one in line, facing my own mortality, because before that, death was just this abstract concept happening to others. Now it hit home, and now I'm the next mortal in that line. And that's made me start thinking about wait, how do you want to spend the rest of your minutes?
Yeah.
And that changed a lot of my approaches. Right now, when it comes to career, work, research, I don't care much about the number of publications. I would say I don't care at all about the number of publications anymore. Anytime it's something that I think about doing, I think, what's the impact? How is it going to help someone, make someone else happier or myself happier? So trauma in that sense, this was not trauma for me, this was a loss, but trauma can put things in perspective and make people revise, and also sometimes remind them of what they were able to do.
Yeah.
A lot of times
Their
we
strength.
all have gone through it.
Yeah.
We don't know how strong we are until we get there, and then you're like, wow, I can do this also. I
Yeah.
can survive this. I can go through this and still be, and it gives you, it's very empowering. It gives you a
Yeah.
sense of control. Not that I'm recommending people should go seek trauma. There are much easier ways to grow, but
Yeah.
And of course, you also have the opportunities of selflessness, be more humane.
Give
Of these
back.
people, a lot of these people who have survived trauma, I mean, I was talking to this police officer, very nice guy, and his reason he became a police officer was when he was young, he grew up in a rough neighborhood and saw a lot of unfairness, a lot of bullying, a lot of pain and suffering in others, and he was like, I'm going to try to stop that. So you can create a meaning out of trauma, and that meaning could be, oh, I'm a damaged person for the rest of my life,
Right.
or no, I want to do this. I want to stop gun violence. I want to go start activism for better gun laws because I lost a child to guns.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's kind of the silver lining. And I too have been fortunate enough to hear people say that. And we've worked with young cancer survivors, so children and adolescents, and they say the same thing, that it showed them how strong they could be. You know, for them, they don't really know what's happening to them, but being in the hospital and going through that experience, a lot of them say it made them better. So I think it gets at that kind of post-traumatic growth, which is, I always think of the flip side of PTSD, so PTSD with the growth. Do you have any suggestions for like the growth aspects or how people can cultivate that?
I think one way we can overcome the negative impact of trauma is the meaning we create for it and create for the experience. Other part, I can create the meaning or fall into a meaning that is sad these days, happening too often, to romanticize it. Oh, this is my identity for the rest of my life, and now I'm a
Right.
broken person. Or it could be now, well, this happened to me for the reasons I didn't do anything to about, and now I'm gonna turn it to this other thing. And a lot of my work in the clinic is on that aspect with the patients. So the first thing is that you did not do anything wrong to deserve this. We all have done wrong things. You could have done wrong thing in that relationship, but none of the wrong things you did made you deserving of being beaten up or assaulted, right? Or raped. And that is the first step of liberating people from the impact of trauma. This is not my problem. This is my problem, but this is not I'm not the reason for this. And this
Right.
is not me. This doesn't define me. And now I want to build a life around it and kick it out of my life. So then the other part is knowing that PTSD, again, I'm repeating, is not my new identity. We can. I had a first responder who was doing an interview for a documentary about trauma. This documentary was focused on trauma in refugees. And I said, if you want Americans to connect with this concept, which is happening in Africa better, let's talk also to a trauma expert who's talking about, let's say, trauma in the children in Detroit, or first responders who was traumatized. And this person was treated by me. He said something during that interview that was, I didn't remember, but was very cool. He said, I talked to other people and other providers who told me, well, you have PTSD. This is your thing, and you have to live with it for the rest of your life. When I talked to this doctor at the end of that initial interview, he smiled and he said, we'll fix it. At that time, quote, I felt my feet, I stood up, and I fought and I fixed it, end quote. So the perception that we can change it, we can fix it, there's a lot of hope.
Yeah, and there's not something wrong with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Arash, we need to have you on for like a 5-hour episode. This is fantastic. I do want to give you an opportunity to tell listeners about what resources you would recommend if you're dealing with PTSD, you have a loved one, or just trauma. What would you recommend for folks?
Absolutely. And one of the challenges people we have usually, whether it's anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder or depression, is it too bad to the point that I need to seek help, right? Is it normal? Is it abnormal? A lot of times people feel, well, I've gone through a lot and this is a normal thing not to be able to sleep or have to drink so much or have nightmares. No, it's not normal. The best compass and guideline is what we have in every psychiatric diagnosis. Significant dysfunction and distress. If whatever is, whether I had a traumatic experience or I am feeling anxious or I have challenges and stressors in life, if it is too distressing, that needs attention. If it is causing dysfunction, I cannot go out, I cannot academically function well, I cannot do my career job well, I cannot do my social life the proper way, that also needs attention. So when these are there, either of these are there, you know you need help. And our healthcare system is a little bit difficult to navigate, right? So there are things you can do in your own life and there are things that you can seek help with. First, the things you can do in life is lifestyle. Of course, if I'm wake up in the morning and eat garbage drive-through food and sit at a desk I hate and lay on the couch and listen to Fox and CNN telling me the whole world is going down in flames, and then while eating garbage food on the couch, well, nothing is going to make me happier. So the focus on social life and having a meaningful life and exercise, I cannot emphasize how important exercise is. But then there's the healthcare system, how to navigate. For those who have a primary care doctor, that's the best starting point. You talk to a primary care doctor, they can do some screening, they can do the referrals if needed. Some people have access to psychiatrists. They can go to a psychiatrist and they can go also reach out to a therapist. Both can do the same thing, meaning that they do the screening, and if a better option is therapy, sorry, that happens. If the better option is medication, that happens. If a combo is a good thing, that happens. And here I want to emphasize that the medications we use for these conditions are not addictive. They're not going to change the person you are. They're not going to change the thinking you have, and they're not going to zombify you. And we have so many of them. If we have side effects, we can change them, because that's one of the things that scares people, right? And of course, you don't have to take it if you don't want to, right? I cannot force anyone to take the pills at home. And then there is And for some people, if they have insurance, they can even call their insurance and say, I have this condition, who is an expert, and they can tell you who in your area is an expert. You can reach out. And those who don't have any resources, there are community mental health services. You can reach out and they can help you. And they have a variety of services, from psychiatric to therapy to case management. So there is help out there. And we can fix this. There's a lot we can do.
That's fantastic. I always recommend Psychology Today's website for Find a Therapist tool in your area who takes your insurance. Fantastic resources. We will link to some of that in the bio of the podcast.
Actually, another resource there is also Anxiety and Depression Association of America. They have a list of people who specialize in anxiety and trauma.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. We will link to that. So listeners, if you have anything that's helped you or a loved one with anxiety or fear or trauma, please put it in the comments. We want to hear from you. Lastly, if you've read Arash's book, please leave a positive Amazon review if you found it helpful. If you have not yet read Dr. Javanbakh's book, Afraid, I highly recommend you pick it up at Amazon or anywhere else you can find this lovely book. Additionally, we are giving away a free signed copy, courtesy of Dr. Javanbakht. So stay tuned to our social media to hear more about that. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for the very important work you're doing.
That wraps up another episode of the BrainSTEM podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe and share this with friends and family, and be sure to follow us on social media at BrainSTEM Podcast.